Freedom, a Fading Illusion, the introduction. The title, Freedom, a Fading Illusion, indicates as I perceive American society today that America has gradually become less free, as it evolves into a serfdom or slave society, the byproduct of globalization. Our federal government continues to become more autocratic as it assumes powers not granted to it by the Constitution. This has become more obvious since the terrorist attacks on the Twin Towers in New York City, the Pentagon, and Pennsylvania on September 11, 2001. In March 2003, President George W. Bush demonstrated America's military might by invading Iraq after giving Saddam Hussein 48 hours in which to leave his kingdom or be bombed into oblivion. From the outset, this opposition was based not on principle or concern for the Iraqi people, but on naked self-interest. France, Germany, and Russia all accepted Washington's pretext for war, that Iraq's alleged weapons of mass destruction posed a threat to the world. In November, along with the rest of the UN Security Council, they voted for Resolution 1441 sanctioning a weapons inspection regime. The three powers did not rule out war on Iraq, but argued that more time had to be given for UN weapons inspectors to carry out their work. Reacting to Bush's final ultimatum to Baghdad, German Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder declared on March 18th, just 2 days before the attack on Iraq, that there was no justification for armed intervention when the UN weapons inspectors had just reported progress. My question was and is, does the degree of threat stemming from the Iraqi dictator justify a war that will bring certain death to thousands of innocent men, women, and children? In the time since the massacre of Baghdad, Washington's justification for this invasion has proven to be unsubstantiated accusations and brazen lies. No so-called weapons of mass destruction or their precursors or the means for manufacturing them have been found. The simple explanation is that there were none, as all involved well knew, nor, despite having access to Iraqi security personnel and mountains of documents, has the U.S. produced anything to demonstrate any link between the secular Hussein regime and the Islamic extremist Al-Qaeda. As for the Bush administration's absurd claim to be liberating Iraq, this has been roundly refuted by the latest UN Security Council resolution. It legitimizes a military occupation and administration. This leads us to several questions. What was the point? Why did so many have to die, and for what? Why do American taxpayers have to fund this aggression in dollars and lives? Throughout the weeks and months leading up to the U.S. attack on Iraq, White House officials repeatedly insisted that oil was not the motive for war. However, the draft resolution circulated the UN Security Council on Friday assigns all-encompassing political and economic powers, including effective control of the revenues from Iraq's oil exports to the U.S. and its military allies, which are simply designated the authority. The powerful international corporate structure continues to manipulate ways to dominate, control, and to exploit the wealth of the world in its pursuit to control international trade and commerce. This aggression is being led by the United States and the industrialized Western world. Of the three nations, the United States, Spain, and Britain, the British have coveted Iraqi oil since it was a thriving empire over 90 years ago, and it is of great national interest to France, Germany, and Russia as well, who have vital financial interest in Iraq. Meanwhile, the European Union, in the wake of this, was fractured with France, Germany together with China and Russia, and dissented from supporting UN Resolution 1441, which was passed unanimously by the Security Council in November 2002. The conclusion appears to be that there is now no room for dissident governments, rogue dictators with ambitions of conquest that might be in conflict with the desire by the globalists to create a one world order. This call to attack Iraq has caused a split among world geopolitical forces because many sovereign nations do not favor turning their national sovereignty and the management of their economies over to a powerful and aggressive Anglo-American corporate empire. The United Nations remains impotent and in step with most of its behavior since its inception, even though the recent United Nations Security Council Resolution 1441 authorized the use of force against Iraq. The expansion of corporate monopolistic capitalism has entrenched itself in the world marketplace, and piece by piece, United States constitutional directives are being buried under a mountain of bureaucratic red tape. Because of this, our democracy today remains mostly an illusion, where an elitist self-protection social control belief system is promoted through the fabrication of our media and history textbooks. These histories omit the influence of the semi-transparent, ruling, moneyed elite who have guided the management of governmental affairs from behind the scenes. They are more visible today because of the information provided through electronic communication systems and the activities of their machinations focused to mold public opinion. But they are also more readily accepted by much of the public to be legitimate organizations. America during the 20th century through today continues to be molded to serve the financial and business interest of what I call the structure of interlocking corporations, or the United States Incorporated. Human perceptions about life deal with the how and why societies change, as they are driven over time by the creation and promotion of new ideas and ideologies. A question seldom explored is where do these new ideas originate? History shows that once a new concept is generated, it must develop a force, a platform, and an organization which will over time promote it until society accepts it and changes its character and values to conform to the new ideology. I believe that think tank foundations guided and supported by gigantic corporate objectives during the 20th century have promoted the change being experienced in Western societies. America was supposedly founded as a nation of poor, but free and independent people in the beginning. However, today, true freedom must be equated with individual economic freedom, which has diminished in America since the 1970s, or otherwise people are not truly free. The American workforce is becoming serfs, slaves to a master corporate entity. We know that only 1% of Americans own about 42% of the nation's wealth, which is an amount equal to the cumulative wealth of the poorest 100 million Americans at the bottom of the economic ladder. We must understand that from the beginning, the Founding Fathers were a class of wealthy business and professional elites who, by virtue of their status, guided the development of our early colonial society. It was these wealthy elite who sought independence from the yoke of oppression of the British Empire. These were the same men who formed the Continental Congress, who after the Revolution organized a somewhat secretive constitutional convention to replace the Articles of Confederation, a states' rights-oriented document. This convention did not include ordinary citizens and those who were not property owners. This should not be a surprise because most historians believe that all societies have been and continue to be guided by a wealthy and self-interested ruling class that is not written about, publicized, or advertised. The 1787 Constitutional Convention was composed of wealthy and brilliant elite who came together to agree on how to govern the new nation under an economic system that would be guided by an agreed-upon philosophical document governing commerce called the Constitution. Among these powerful men were many who had strong ties to British interest, including Benjamin Franklin and others, representatives of many other different social-economic interests. Some maintained their loyalty to the King of England, who were agents of the crown left behind after the Revolution. They regretted the break of the colonies from British rule because it lost or diminished their position of power and influence within the colonies. There were ideologists of different sorts who wanted to change the form of governing from states' rights dominion, such as the Articles of Confederation, a precarious agreement among the states. The southern colonies, the more agricultural regions, wanted each colony or state to be independent and sovereign, which could create and circulate their own currency using state-chartered banks. There were those, mostly from the New England colonies, who favored a strong national government or federalism, and a financial dependency upon the Bank of England, who had business interest that needed to be furthered politically through the creation of special national legislations. Those who favored states' rights did not want a national government to have the power to interfere in the lives of individuals or their business activities or their religious practices. The Southern Confederacy built a wealthy agrarian empire using black slavery as the cornerstone of their economy. The northern states also had many businesses and used various forms of slavery, including black slavery, to build urban centers around rapidly expanding urban centers. There were two factors that brought disharmony within the Republic: the difference in type of industry, and second, each state's culture that evolved around lifestyle and political organization. When the Confederacy's War of Independence, known as the Civil War, began, cultural, economic, and political differences intensified and became the foundation for a great economic battle to determine control of Congress and the destiny of the nation. At the same time, many special interests, such as British, Swiss, French, Spanish, Italian, etc., had formed alliances to implement conspiracies to divide the nation and cause a war between the northern industrial and the southern agricultural states. One nation built alliances around the world, the British international bankers, who eventually allied with Wall Street. Lincoln called this financial union the money trust. Their purpose was global. They lent money to governments, many of whom could never repay the debt, and therefore became controlled by the money trust, and an involvement that is clearly part of American history. When the Union went to war with the Confederacy, the British bankers collaborated with the British and French monarchies to divide the constitutional republic into smaller and independent states rather than one union of states. Except for the determination of President Lincoln and the northern industrial elite, this could have happened. Lincoln, however, made the number one goal to preserve the Union and to resist the entrapments of the London-based money trust. The era since the end of the war for independence by the Confederacy can be defined as the era of growth of federalism. It was also the period when the power of corporations became totally unleashed by the 1886 Supreme Court decision, which allowed corporations to possess the same rights as any individual American citizen. It was this period of time when socialism, or collectivism, became an internationally hot topic among the educated, the international bankers, and by the owners of corporations. Governments continued to clash with the world's money trust, which was competing with the growing power of corporations. These elements were powerful enough to influence the nature of legislation passed by Congress. This process has changed the character of America's government and how freedom in America would be managed in pursuit of building an American empire as American businesses became more and more interlocked globally with foreign businesses, cartels, and governments. By the end of the Second War, in 1945, the British Empire retained its illusion of governing the world, as had been proposed by Sir Cecil Rhodes in the late 1800s. The challenge came when Dean Gotterham Atkinson, 1893 to 1971, a lawyer, a member of the smallest circle of American power elite, proposed that the United States should take the leadership of the world away from the British. Atkinson was a leading player in the Bretton Woods Conference, where the international monetary system was established. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank were created and interlocked with the Bank of International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland. His power guided the formulation of America's foreign policy, which included the necessity to create the illusion to contain Soviet communism, the content of the Truman Doctrine, the Marshall Plan, and NATO. After 1953, Atkinson primarily acted as an advisor to American presidents until his death in 1971. There were obviously other but invisible power elite who were involved in directing foreign policy changes for American presidents, and not all of them were American citizens. In early 2000, with a summit in Florence, Italy, President Clinton addressed this question saying, "We think it's a great challenge to marry our conceptions of social justice and equal opportunity with our commitment to globalization. We must realize that the perception of most American adults about the world's illusion-ridden, who are like the Russians under communism, except the Russians inhabit a less technology society and have a single employer. And this nation of free and equal employees is the reality that underlies and surrounds the wealthy few on the great North American continent. With respect to America's nation's sovereignty, Strobe Talbot, number 2 man under Clinton in the State Department, remarked, "I'll bet within the next 100 years, nationhood as we know it will be obsolete. All states will recognize a single global authority. All countries are basically social arrangements, no matter how permanent and even sacred they may seem at any one time. They are all artificial and temporary." So according to Strobe Talbot, we Americans live under an illusion. But what is the illusion under which Americans live, and who are its promoters? This question prompted me to pursue an extensive investigation into the power of money and influence throughout America's history, which is now culminating in an investigation of globalization. I found the growth of the power of the ruling American elite includes the creation of multiple interlockings among multinational corporations, the world's money trust, and with most national governments. I believe the financial power operates in conjunction with corporate cartels, which have become the two major forces competing for control over the world's economy. When you understand the ultimate goal of globalization, you come to realize that personal freedoms must be limited and will gradually be replaced with collectivist ideas focused on groups' rights or polarization. The discouragement of competition, individuality, and positive moral values. In organizing a global economy where finance cooperates with commerce, who are the two major forces, there are two possible outcomes. First, a single power faction of wealthy elite will prevail as an oligarchy who will direct the world's economy through corporate edicts. Or second, multiple elitist factions motivated by common interests and ideas will act in unison and share power to influence the direction of the momentum of an international economic power structure, which is moving the world toward a collectivist world managed by what I call the Incorporated Global System, or IGS. It is the interlocking of corporate powers with all the financial elites which exerts pressure to bring about change in America. They dominate the media and other sources of communication, the government, education, and perpetuating machinations owned largely by the elite class. These machinations are used to influence the direction of social, economic, and political change in America. This has evolved gradually in America since the end of the War of the Confederacy. However, for the ruling elite to implement world domination, they must work through and manipulate not only American business organizations, but they must also guide the actions of their interlockings with international structures, such as the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the Bank for Reconstruction, and a multitude of other organizations.